It was a quiet, cloudless morning in early fall, the kind where the air carried a chill, but the sun tried its best to warm the skin. The park was nearly empty except for two old men sitting side by side on a worn wooden bench, their shoulders slightly hunched, their coats buttoned up tightly against the breeze. One of them, Harold, wore a navy blue cap with faded embroidery that read, Vietnam Veteran. The other, Frank, had a walking stick resting between his knees and a silver pin on his lapel that shone softly in the morning light. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. After all these years, words had become optional. Their friendship was older than the trees around them, forged in heat and fear and mud halfway across the world. Now they sat quietly, watching squirrels dart across the path, listening to the faint rustle of leaves above their heads. Occasionally, one of them would nod or grunt in response to something unsaid. That morning was different, though. Frank's cough was worse. He clutched a small handkerchief in his right hand, and his breath came with more effort than usual. Harold noticed but said nothing. He'd learned long ago that a man like Frank didn't appreciate concern unless it came in silence. After a while, Frank tapped Harold gently on the arm and said, I think I need to go see the doc today. Harold nodded once, then stood and helped him up. They didn't talk about it, but both of them knew something was shifting. Later that afternoon, Harold sat alone in the hospital waiting room, clutching his cap in his lap, staring at the speckled linoleum floor. Nurses came and went. A clock ticked on the wall. He watched the hands move with dread. Finally, a doctor appeared and explained in soft, practiced tones that Frank had been admitted for observation and that he needed rest. Harold was allowed to visit for just a few minutes. Inside the room, Frank looked small beneath the pale blue sheets, a machine clicking softly beside him. His eyes opened when Harold entered, and he offered a weak smile. Didn't think I'd end up like this, he whispered. Harold just sat down beside him and placed the cap on the edge of the bed. They didn't say much, but they held hands briefly, a silent promise exchanged. For the next several days, Harold returned every morning. He brought crossword puzzles and old war magazines, sometimes even a thermos of coffee, just in case Frank felt strong enough. But each day, Frank seemed to fade a little more. Until one morning, Harold arrived and the nurse shook her head gently. She didn't need to say anything. Harold walked out of the hospital in a daze, the cap clutched in his hand like it might blow away if he loosened his grip. A few days later, the funeral procession moved slowly down the main street of the town. A hearse draped in a large American flag led the way, followed by two black cars filled with family. On the sidewalks, people stood in silence, some holding their hands over their hearts, others saluting. At the end of the block, a small group of uniformed soldiers stood at attention, rifles held firmly in their arms. Harold stood alone at the corner of the street, dressed in his formal jacket, his medals pinned carefully, his tie slightly crooked. He didn't cry. Frank wouldn't have wanted that. Instead, he stood tall, saluted slowly as the hearse passed by, then let his arm fall as the wind picked up the corner of the flag. The sound of the rifles firing their salute cracked through the still air like thunder. Birds scattered from the trees. A little boy across the street jumped and clung to his father's leg. Harold stayed until the last car turned the corner and disappeared, and only then did he lower his eyes. That evening he returned to the bench, the same one where he and Frank had shared so many quiet mornings. It felt different now, emptier, colder, like something sacred had been pulled away. He sat down heavily, the wood groaning beneath him, and placed Frank's cap beside him on the bench. He stared out over the pond, remembering the way Frank used to complain about the ducks and their endless quacking. A gentle wind passed through the park, stirring the leaves, and Harold closed his eyes just for a moment, letting the memories wash over him like sunlight. The war, the hospital tents, the laughter they shared after surviving another day. And now, silence. Real, deep silence. Harold reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small photograph. Him and Frank in their 20s, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning like idiots in front of a tank. He stared at it for a long time, then slipped it back into his pocket and whispered, "Rest easy, old friend. You did good." It had been weeks since Frank's funeral, but Harold still found himself returning to the same bench every day. The seat now held a worn impression of his body, as if the wood itself had memorized his shape. He came in the morning sometimes, but usually around sunset when the light made the lake shimmer and the air was soft and a little sad. He didn't bring much with him anymore. Just his old coat, the photo in his pocket, and Frank's cap, which he now wore more often than not. Most people in the park passed him by without much notice. A quiet old man sitting alone, watching ducks and squirrels, a relic of something they didn't understand. Harold didn't mind. He preferred the solitude. It gave him space to think, to remember, to forget. That particular Thursday, the wind was light and the sky streaked with faint clouds. He had just settled onto the bench when he heard the sound of footsteps approaching. They were faster, lighter than he was used to. He glanced up and saw a young man, maybe 20, maybe younger, walking with a backpack slung over one shoulder, earbuds in, hoodie slightly oversized. The kid looked like he didn't belong in this quiet old park. But then, neither did Harold anymore. What surprised him was when the boy slowed down, looked at the bench, and without a word, sat down next to him. Harold raised an eyebrow slightly but said nothing. The kid didn't speak either. They just sat there, both looking out at the water, like strangers sharing a bus stop. A few minutes passed in silence, until the boy finally pulled out one earbud and asked, "Mind if I sit here?" Harold gave a short nod. "Already are." The boy chuckled awkwardly. "Yeah, sorry. I just didn't feel like going home yet." Harold grunted. "Home can wait sometimes." More silence. Then the kid asked, "You come here often?" "Every day," Harold replied. "You?" "First time," the boy said, glancing around. "My professor said this park was peaceful. Figured I'd give it a try." He was right. The conversation paused again. The boy tapped his shoe against the dirt. "You military?" Harold turned to look at him fully now, surprised. What gave it away? The boy pointed to the patch on his cap. "Vietnam, right?" Harold gave a soft hum. "Long time ago." The boy hesitated, then added, "My grandfather was in Iraq. He passed away before I was old enough to remember him much." Harold nodded slowly. "Still family. That means something." The boy looked down at his hands. "I think that's why I sat here. You kind of reminded me of him. I know that sounds weird." Harold didn't think it was weird. He looked at the boy more closely now. There was something in his face, a mixture of restlessness and sadness, like he was carrying something too big for his age. "What's your name, son?" Harold asked. "Liam," the boy replied. "Harold," the old man offered in return. They shook hands, firmly, not the kind of handshake you give when you're distracted. It meant something. For the next few days, Harold began to see Liam more and more. Sometimes he'd arrive first, sometimes the kid would already be waiting. They never planned it. It just became part of the rhythm. At first, they only talked about simple things, the weather, school, Harold's dog who passed years ago. But slowly, Liam opened up. He talked about how he struggled with his classes, how he didn't know what he wanted to do with his life, how everything felt like pressure and noise. Harold listened quietly, occasionally giving short, sharp bits of advice. "You don't need to know everything now," he'd say. "Hell, I didn't know squat at your age. Just try not to do stupid things twice." Liam laughed at that. "That sounds like something my granddad would have said." "Then he must have been a smart man," Harold replied. One afternoon, Liam asked the question Harold had been expecting. "Do you miss him? Your friend, I mean." Harold didn't answer immediately. He stared out across the water, his jaw set. Then he said, "Every damn day. He was the closest thing I had to a brother. He knew everything about me, the things no one else ever will." Liam was quiet for a while. Then he asked, "Is that why you still come here?" Harold nodded. "It's the last place we talked. We sat right here for years. Same time, same place. If I stop coming, I don't know, it feels like I'm letting go of him completely." Liam looked at him differently after that, with more respect. maybe even understanding. I don't have a place like that for my granddad, Liam admitted. Just some pictures my mom keeps in a box. Harold reached into his coat and pulled out the photo again. The one of him and Frank, young and smiling. He held it out. You'll find your place eventually. And when you do, don't let anyone tell you it doesn't matter. Liam took the photo, carefully studying it. You guys looked fearless. Harold chuckled. We were stupid. But yeah, fearless too. They sat for a long time that day. No more questions. Just silence. Not the kind that feels awkward, but the kind that feels earned. Liam did the same. Same time tomorrow? Liam asked. Harold smiled faintly. Wouldn't miss it. That was the beginning of something neither of them had expected. The sky was pale that morning, streaked with silver clouds that hinted at a coming rain. Harold sat on the familiar bench, leaning forward slightly with his hands resting on his cane, his breath visible in the crisp air. He knew it would be the last time, though he hadn't said anything to Liam yet. Over the past weeks, their meetings had become part of his rhythm, the only thing keeping the days from blending into one another. But something inside him had shifted. His body ached more, sleep came less, and the silence at home had grown heavier. He'd made a decision. Liam arrived not long after sunrise, wearing his usual hoodie and carrying 2 coffees in a cardboard tray. Black, no sugar, just like always, he said with a grin, handing Harold the cup. Harold took it and nodded with a faint smile. You're a good kid, Liam. You're not so bad yourself, old man, Liam replied with a chuckle. They drank in silence for a moment, watching the wind move across the lake, stirring the thin ripples near the edge. Then Harold turned slightly and extended his hand. Liam looked surprised, then grasped it firmly. It was a moment heavier than either of them expected. Harold's grip was strong, steady, and he looked Liam straight in the eyes. Thank you, he said quietly, for sitting with me all these weeks. You gave me something I didn't know I was missing. Liam's voice caught for a second. You're the one who helped me, more than you know. Harold released the handshake, nodded once, then looked back at the lake. I need to take a little trip, he said. Nothing dramatic, just somewhere I've been meaning to go for a long time. Where? Liam asked. Overseas, Harold replied vaguely, back to a place I left unfinished. Liam didn't press for more details. He had learned by now that when Harold wanted to share, he would. So instead, he nodded. When are you leaving? Harold smiled softly. Soon. That afternoon, Harold returned home and pulled a small notepad from the drawer of his desk. With shaky hands but careful attention, he began to write. The words came slowly at first, but then they poured out with surprising clarity. It wasn't a long message, just enough to say what needed to be said. When he finished, he folded the page and placed it in a plain white envelope. On the front, he simply wrote, Liam. The next morning, Liam arrived at the bench, as usual. But Harold wasn't there. At first, he thought maybe he was running late. He waited 20 minutes, then 30. Still nothing. It wasn't like him. Then Liam noticed something unusual. An envelope placed gently on the wooden slats of the bench, right where Harold always sat. With a curious frown, he picked it up and saw his name in Harold's neat handwriting. He hesitated a moment, heart racing slightly, then opened it. Inside was a short letter, written in blue ink. Liam, I don't know where life will take you, but I hope you keep listening to people. You have a gift for it, more than you realize. These past weeks meant a lot to me. You made an old man feel like he still mattered, and that's not a small thing. I'm heading somewhere far away, maybe for good. I need to see some things one last time. If I don't come back, know this. You were a good friend, the kind I never expected at this point in my life. Thank you for your company, your questions, your silence. Take care of yourself. And if you ever find yourself sitting next to someone who looks like they've been waiting a long time to speak, listen. Harold. Liam sat down slowly, holding the letter in his hands, his chest heavy with emotion. He looked out at the lake, the wind still moving across its surface, and imagined Harold standing at an airport gate somewhere, or maybe already in the air, chasing ghosts only he could see. Liam didn't cry, not then. But he stayed on that bench for a long time, watching the water, holding the letter tightly, as if it were a part of something bigger than either of them. And from that day forward, the bench never stayed empty for long, because Liam understood now. It wasn't just a bench, it was a bridge, a quiet place where stories passed from one soul to another. And someday, maybe someone else would sit beside him and ask, "Do you mind if I sit here?" And he would smile, remembering, "Already are."